When the hunting was done, he'd walk back with me to town, trotting alongside until we arrived at the bridge. There he would stop and sit down, and nothing I did would make him come farther. I tried waiting him out to see where he would go, but when it was obvious that I wasn't going to leave, he merely lay down and went to sleep, or turned and started back into the woods, looking back to see if we were going hunting again. Take a moment and think about this. Why do you think Ike would not cross the bridge and go home with Gary? Please pause the video for a moment. Once I left him, crossed the bridge, and then hid in back of a building and watched. He stayed until I was out of sight and then turned and trotted north away from the bridge along the river. There were no houses in that direction, at least on the far side of the river, and I watched him until he disappeared into the woods. I was no wiser than I had been before. The rest of his life was a mystery and would remain so for 30 years. But when we were together, we became fast friends, at least on my part. I would cook an extra egg sandwich for Ike, and when the flights weren't coming, we would talk. That is to say, I would talk, tell him all my troubles, and he would sit, his enormous head sometimes resting on my knee, his huge brown eyes looking up at me while I petted him and rattled on. On the weekends, when I stayed out, I would construct a lean-to and make a fire, and he would curl up on the edge of my blanket. Many mornings I would awaken to find him under the frost-covered blanket with me, sound asleep, my arm thrown over him, his breathing rumbled against my side. It seemed like there'd always been an Ike in my life, and then one morning he wasn't there, and I never saw him again. I tried to find him. I would wait for him in the mornings by the bridge, but he never showed again. I thought he might have gotten hit by a car or his owners moved away. I mourned him and missed him, but I did not learn what happened to him for 30 years. I grew and went into the crazy parts of life, army, and those other mistakes a young man could make. I grew older and got back into dogs, this time sled dogs, and ran the Iditarod race across Alaska. After my first run, I came back to Minnesota with slides of the race to show to all the people who had supported me. A sporting goods store had been one of my sponsors, and I gave a public slideshow of the race one evening. There was an older man sitting in a wheelchair, and I saw that when I told a story of how Cookie, my lead dog, had saved my life, his eyes teared up and he nodded quietly. When the event was over, he wheeled up to me and shook my hand. I had a dog like your Cookie, a dog that saved my life. Oh, did you run sleds? He shook his head. No, not like that. I lived up in Twin Forks when I was young and was drafted to serve in the Korean War. I had a Labrador that I raised and hunted with and left him when I went away. I was gone just under a year. I got wounded and lost the use of my legs. When I came back from the hospital, he was waiting there, and he spent the rest of his life by my side. I would have gone crazy without him. I'd sit for hours and talk to him, and he would listen quietly. It was so sad. He loved to hunt, and I never hunted again. He faded off, and his eyes were moist again. I still miss him. I looked at him, then out the window of the sporting goods store. It was spring, and the snow was melting outside, but I was seeing fall and a boy and a lab sitting in a duck blind. Twin Forks, he said, and the Korean War? The time was right, and the place and the dog. Your dog? I said. Was he named Ike? He smiled and nodded. Why, yes. But how did you know him? There was a soft spring rain starting, and the window misted with it. That was why Ike had not come back. He had another job. Yes, I said, turning to him. He was my friend.